Warning, this chapter contains adult content, which has been recorded in a separate video for members only. If you wish to read the chapter in its entirety, please visit the original story from the link in the description. Indomitable Heart by Renette. Chapter 13. Given the identities of their passengers, the Daybreaker was granted priority landing clearance when they reached Coruscant. Not only that, they were routed straight to the temple, allowed to set down on the massive ziggurat itself. Obi-Wan imagined the last time a Mando ship had been that close to the temple, there had been an impressive exchange of fire, given it was probably during the assaults of the long-ago Crusaders. All the hot Mando'a aboard, Obi-Wan included, donned their armor for arrival. Anakin, one of the few without full Beskar, made do with his usual mix of Jedi synth leather tabards over Mando flight suit with Durasteel armored boots and gauntlets. During transit, the Mando had worked feverishly to refurbish the Beskar the Kaminoans had withheld from Jango for so many long years. Jango had received his armor from his husband's hands, and Obi-Wan had almost reverently dressed his Mandalore. They disembarked with Jango at the head of the column of 100 Alpha Arcs, with Baba at one side and Obi-Wan in full Beskar at the other. Behind the Arcs, the hot Mando'a had formed up a column with Silas as their interim leader and Anakin among their number. Chancellor Fang Zar, former senator of Cern Prime, met them with a horde of attaches and hangers-on surrounding him. Zar had succeeded Bail Antilles, who had served 2 terms after Chancellor Valorum and had retired from both the Chancellery and the Senate. The new Chancellor had been a supporter of Antilles' policies, although the worsening conflicts had made for a troubled start to his government. Mace Windu and Yoda stood among the politicians as the chief representatives of the Order, but numerous other Jedi crowded the plaza. Obi-Wan recognized quite a few. The Battlemaster Sin Draling, his friend Quinlan Voss, even the chief's archivist Jocasta Nu. Ranks of temple guards stood at the ready, force pikes glowing golden. Bland political greetings were made on all sides, with much bowing on Obi-Wan's part, and none on Jango's. Obi-Wan had expected nothing less, although it was clear that Chancellor Zar was trying very hard not to show his amusement. An older human male, he was a bit shorter than Obi-Wan and dressed in the traditional draping garb of his homeworld. In truth, Obi-Wan was a bit amazed the Chancellor had come all the way to the ziggurat to greet them. Knowledge of the clone army was causing fervent debate in the Senate, and Zar had very little control over the resulting furor. Perhaps Obi-Wan thought somewhat uncharitably the Chancellor just wanted to get away from his desk for a bit. "Chancellor," Obi-Wan greeted when he was introduced. "You do keep things interesting, Knight Kenobi," Zar said, smile breaking through beneath his bushy grey moustache. "Not my intent, Chancellor," Obi-Wan said, glad his bouche hid the flush that raced to his cheeks. Zar laughed at that, then turned to Jango. "Mando'a," Zar greeted, offering his hand. Jango grasped Zar's forearm in the Mando fashion, a little surprised to be addressed by title. "You'll need to speak to your people soon," Zar warned. Jango dipped his head silently. While he hadn't yet looked at the news out of the Mandalorian sector, he imagined it was rather chaotic given the impending war and his own sudden reappearance. He'd been happy to leave the bureaucracy and administration to Duchess Kriz over the years, but if the Republic was going to war and his Riduur and Verd'ike were the army, he'd readily assume the traditional role of warlord and take every Mando'a willing to follow orders at his back. His people were warriors of renown, and he wouldn't keep them from a fight so long as they towed the line with regards to certain standards of behavior. He didn't want any Death Watch fly-by-nights out there massacring civilians just for the fun of it. After some flowery words about freedom and democracy, and the Republic's fight against tyranny for the hollow journalists covering the arrival of the clones, the Chancellor departed back to the Senate Dome with some of his aides and attendants. He left a gaggle of senators in his wake. They, Obi-Wan presumed, would be insinuating themselves into the Jedi review of the troops. Obi-Wan didn't like it, especially when he saw the senator from Naboo, Palpatine, in the bunch. Palpatine had always inexplicably made Obi-Wan's language, and it didn't help that he'd been thoroughly useless during the blockade crisis while his people were starving and dying in Trade Federation camps. Palpatine had made some pretty speeches, but had been absolutely no help. He'd tried to run for Chancellor when Valorum's term ended, campaigning on the sympathy garnered by the blockade, but had been soundly defeated by Bail Antilles of Alderaan. It was a wonder, Obi-Wan thought, that Palpatine was still serving Naboo in the Senate. He would have thought Queen Amidala or her successor, Jamila, would have recalled him by now. Perhaps Palpatine did just well enough not to warrant the fuss of selecting or electing a new senator. Given the number of troopers and the accompaniment of the senators, Obi-Wan wasn't terribly surprised when Mace Windu invited the politicians and hollow journalists to join the Jedi in reviewing the skills of the troopers in one of the larger gymnasiums, usually only used for setting up obstacle courses or sparring tournaments. The politicians and reporters flocked to pepper Mace with questions as he led them inside with a last nod at Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan dipped his head in silent understanding. He would lead the clone and Mando contingent to the correct arena inside the temple. Obi-Wan's hands flashed, relaying the plan to Jango. Jango nodded, then acted as drill instructor for the clones, firmly calling out cadence to set the troopers in motion. Obi-Wan had only the barest hint of warning, a faint feeling of impending mischief, and then Jango was singing out in Mando'a, Vod'e, an ancient Mando war chant. Obi-Wan grinned broadly inside his bouche, and his smile only grew when he heard how Jango had changed the lyrics for his Verd'ike. Kote! The troopers sang out in unison. Glory! Kandosi sakarata obi Vod'e an! One indomitable heart, brothers all. Coruscanta! Aden mi Vod'e an! The wrath of Coruscant, brothers all. Bal kote! Tarasum! Kote! And glory, eternal glory. Josaram canto atome. We shall bear its weight together. Sa kiram now tresinkad Vod'e an. Forged like the saber in the fires of death. Brothers all. When the clones had finished their version of Vod'e an, Miles sang out, and the hot Mando'a gave full throat to their own marching song. A new verse had been added since Obi-Wan had heard them all sing together, memorizing Jango's vengeance against Montrose for the death of Jaster Muriel. His grin at that point was stretching his cheeks so wide, it was almost painful. He could feel the surprise and then smug pride rolling off Jango at his side. If the politicians walking ahead of them had opinions on the display, they wisely kept their feelings to themselves. Obi-Wan led their guests into the temple, nodding in greeting to the temple guards as they passed. The guards, as usual, remained still as statues. The columns of troops bunched in a bit closer together as they entered the temple, although not much. The corridors on the upper levels of the ziggurat were broad and high-ceilinged, and the troopers could march 5 abreast in tight formation, leaving space between them and the wall for other foot traffic. Obi-Wan led the way, finally stopping when they were lined up in one of the massive gymnasiums with arena-style seating. Between the Alpha-class clones and the hot Mando'a, there were nearly 400 armored warriors standing at parade rest. In the stands before them sat the entire Jedi High Council, plus numerous other respected masters. For the demo, Jango said over the private channel between himself and Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan made a quiet noise of assent. I've kept in shape as I can. I want a free spar with you and me, then you and one of the Alphas. I know I can't take you in this condition. I don't know if the boys can. I'll make them earn it if they put me down, Obi-Wan promised, and Jango chuckled softly. His reputation as a bounty hunter, able to go toe-to-toe with a Force-sensitive, was likely about to get a drubbing, but he knew his best to take his husband down a peg or two. Jate'kara, Jango addressed, voice loud and firm through the vocoder. You know I have stood at the side of my spouse Obi-Wan Kenobi, when I am able, and at his side have fought the Sith and hunted them on my own. For first demonstration, Obi-Wan has agreed to open spar with me. My blast is set to stun, his blade's on training strength. I freely admit I'm out of practice at Jedi tricks, but my skill will show a baseline to which you can compare the skills of these commandos. Mace Windu, the Master of the Order, nodded. Obi-Wan and Jango strode forward, changing their weapon settings to non-lethal. For a long moment, they stood still and silent across from one another, and the demonstration began. Despite his claims of being out of shape, Jango was still remarkably fit and skilled. Unfortunately for him, Obi-Wan had been deployed to just about every hotspot in the galaxy over the past few years, and his skills had improved exponentially since the last time they'd sparred for anything other than exercise. They'd worked out together a couple times on the flight from Kamino, but not at their highest intensity. Jango lasted longer against Obi-Wan than many could, but he still ended up on his back, Obi-Wan's bright blade pressed up under his chin. "You do look good like this," Obi-Wan teased over their in-helmet comm. Jango growled softly, and Obi-Wan laughed, rising and offering Jango his hand. "Just for that, I'm going to keep sending the boys at you until they put you on your ships." Jango huffed, accepting the hand up. Obi-Wan raised one of his shoulders minutely, then stepped back into the center of the mats. "Next!" Obi-Wan called confidently, stepping back into the Saresu ready position, his primary blade raised next to his cheek, the dark saber held in guard across his front. "Alpha 17, Jango called, and one of the clones broke from their ranks. Like all the Alpha Arcs, he had been trained extensively by Jango, so it was no surprise when Alpha 17 assumed the same ready position Jango used before engaging with Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan dodged the first few shots, mentally cataloging motions and habits. Alpha 17 didn't last quite as long as Jango. The Mandalore called another of the cadre forward when Obi-Wan disarmed Alpha 17. It wasn't until the 7th Alpha Arc that Obi-Wan began tired noticeably. The 10th finally got the opening needed to put Obi-Wan flat on his back, and the other Arcs immediately broke into an enthusiastic cheer. "Ciare, bora!" Obi-Wan panted out. "Vor'e!" the Arc said, and stood, then hauled Obi-Wan to his feet. "The hot Mando'a have always been renowned not only for our ability to fight, but our ability to fight together," Jango said in that strong parade ground cadence. "I've done my best to teach that cohesiveness to the Alpha Arcs." He turned and thumped his fist against his chest plate 3 times. The Arcs straightened to attention, then began a synchronized marching and weapons handling demonstration of uncanny precision. It didn't have the same heart-shuddering vigor of a Mando Akaan'redal, but it definitely proved that the men could move in unison, and it was awe-inspiring to witness. There was no cadence to guide the troopers' movements, only the soft click of their plastoid armor shifting as they moved, the muffled thump of 100 boots striking the floor in unison. Their long blaster rifles, twirled and shifted, were tossed from man to man and in high arcs from one hand to the other. They stilled to perfect attention at a heartbeat, unmoving as statues. Obi-Wan's heart ached, and the entire room seemed to hold their breath. "I could not vouch for the other troops. I've not trained them, nor seen them in action, but if they are half the soldiers this class is, they will be warriors worthy of my clan," Jango said, confidently breaking the fragile silence. "And even if they are not as skilled, they are my children, despite that I have only been allowed to be parent to one." He rested his hand on Baba's shoulder, and the boy straightened under the attention of their audience. "Masters, the true skill of these soldiers is impossible to demonstrate in a single showing," Obi-Wan said, stepping forward to stand at Jango's side. "I would request that they are screened by our healers to ensure the scientists of Kamino have given them the best possible care, and then further demonstrations can be made once they have rested. As you see, one of the scientists of Kamino has accompanied us here at your request. I am sure there is much more that they can tell us about this army." The masters muttered among themselves, but conceded. Soon the Alpha Arcs were trailing Obi-Wan and Jango down into the halls of healing. "Bringing me trouble, as usual?" Obi-Wan's old friend Bant asked, coming up to greet them. Among calamari, she exuded calm and warmth in her aura, a skill she'd developed in her training as a healer. "Yup," Obi-Wan agreed. "Need everyone checked out and pay close attention to their heads. We got readings there indicating there are chips in there, but the scanners on the Daybreaker aren't as good as the ones here. Also, we removed a chip from Jango, so we should get that looked at too. Make sure he's healing properly." "How thorough of a checkup do you want?" Band asked Jango, and he cocked his head thinking. "A very thorough checkup," Jango decided.
only dogs to see me in the past 10 years have been Kaminoan, and you'll forgive me if I don't quite trust their motives."
"Understandable," Bant agreed with a nod. "Follow me. We'll put out an all-hands call, so hopefully we'll get through this fairly quickly."
Django nodded, steering Boba along with him. Obi-Wan remained with them as long as he could, but Django was still waiting while Boba had his checkup when the council called Obi-Wan up to their chambers for debriefing. Django waved Obi-Wan off, and when Obi-Wan had ascended the spire, Anakin was already waiting in the antechamber, Tom Way with him. Anakin's shoulders rose high with tension.
"Ori'vod," Anakin greeted. "Who to see, Anakin?"
Obi-Wan said, reaching up to rest his hand comfortingly on Anakin's shoulder.
"We'll figure it out,"
he promised in basic, and Anakin let his shoulders relax slightly. They both knew that wasn't really a promise Obi-Wan could make, but Anakin had been trusting Obi-Wan long enough, and having that trust rewarded, that it was second nature. The door soon opened, allowing the two Jedi and their Kaminoan guest to enter the council chambers. The entire High Council and no few members of the other councils were present. They, too, were more than a little perturbed at what Obi-Wan had found on Kamino, and not a little displeased that the reputation of the Jedi was being linked with kidnapping and full sentient cloning. Both acts were not only held as immoral across most of the galaxy, but were also illegal in the Republic. Bowing to the council, Obi-Wan shared his tale from the beginning, summarizing the information Yan had sent before his death and highlighting the discrepancies and deletions. Anakin filled in the things he had learned from the secure on-network server, and then Obi-Wan picked back up with the things he had seen. The hundreds of thousands of versions of his husband's face, but years too young. The tubes upon tubes of embryos and infants and toddlers. The clones only decanted when they were the equivalent of about 2 standard years old, capable of walking and speech and basic motor skills.
"Is this an accurate assessment?"
Mace told Tonway, and the Kaminoan dipped their head.
"It is what Knight Kenobi was shown,"
Tonway said, which didn't quite answer the question.
The muscle of Mace's jaw flexed as he ground his teeth. "The Jedi Order and the Republic Senate will both need a full accounting of the initial trials, cloning procedures, training practices, and nutritional and medical information on this army," Mace said. "Proprietary information or not, you will ensure we know everything there is to know about the operation that resulted in this army. Not what you think we need to know, everything, no matter how trivial, and you can start with the chips in the soldiers' heads."
Tonway hesitated, then nodded. Mace summoned 2 temple guards. The council waited in silence until the masked sentinels appeared.
"Escort our guest to the prepared visitor suite," Mace directed the guards. "No communications in or out until we know everything. Ensure they have enough data for a full accounting."
The guards bowed, and Tonway was soon escorted away. With the Kaminoan gone, the council began asking Obi-Wan for more details on all he had seen and heard on Kamino. They spoke for nearly an hour before the doors opened again, admitting Django in his Beskar gown, helmet carried at his hip to keep from aggravating the back patch he still wore on the side of his neck where they'd cut out the control chip.
"I've been doing a lot of digging since leaving Kamino,"
Django said by way of a start. The counselors shifted to stare in slight disbelief at his audacity and interrupting their meeting with that invitation.
Obi-Wan put back a smile. His Riduur had a habit of getting people to underestimate his intelligence. They saw armor and thought Django's blasters and missiles were where he was most dangerous.
"The client who betrayed me on Kolma was a Mon. I've tentatively identified him as Higo Damask II, part of the banking clan. I've even more tentatively identified him as the Dajeti, the Sith, that fled Naboo just after we broke the Trade Federation's blockade. And if he had a single skinny finger to do with the cloning of that army, you better find him and find out what he knows fast. Whoever commissioned that army did so with the intent for the troopers to be grown and trained now, just as the Separatist crisis is building toward war. They arranged for my abduction and long-term captivity, complete with a chip to keep me docile and obedient, and a clone to raise as my son as further insurance. They arranged for chips to be placed in every soldier of this exceptionally convenient army, and I haven't the first fucking clue what those chips they put in my Verd'ike do. I may be seeing patterns where none exist, but I don't believe so."
Obi-Wan nearly rolled his eyes as the council began whispering furiously among themselves. Jango had certainly set the tuga among the porgs with that bit of supposition. Glancing over, Obi-Wan could see the smugness in the line of Jango's spine, the cock of his hips. Mir'sheb, Obi-Wan couldn't help but think affectionately.
No matter their origin, their original purpose, or the will of the Senate, the clones are a Jedi matter,
Obi-Wan said firmly.
They did not ask to be brought into existence in this manner, but they are here now, living and breathing and ready to fight on the orders of a Jedi. In a war we've been trying to prevent for the past decade, they have been raised with the expectation that they would be led into battle by Jedi generals. Our first task is to ensure that they have all the rights afforded to naturally born sentients. Right now, war seems easy for the Senate. They have a ready-made army at their disposal, already bought and paid for. They have control over the assignment of Jedi by our own agreement. But those troopers are sentient beings, born and bred for this fight perhaps, but more than worthy of full citizenship rights and moreover our respect.
Obi-Wan paused, looking around the room.
Counselors,
Obi-Wan continued,
I have been to war before, perhaps even at greater frequency than many of my compatriots in the Order. But those planetary conflicts will look like minor skirmishes in what is to come if the Separatists have their way. Their armies are not sentient, but droids, produced by the millions. I know no Jedi wants a part of war, never mind hostilities that will see battles fought across the Republic. I want no part of this either. It is not our role to lead armies into battle, and it seems to me that this conflict has been carefully built up until there seems little choice but war on a galactic scale.
You think the Sith has manipulated us into this?
Operaxis said somewhat accusingly. He was not one of Obi-Wan's fans and usually seemed of the opinion that Obi-Wan and Anakin created trouble for the sheer enjoyment of it.
I think no Jedi worth the title will commission an army of clones and then kidnap a man as the foundation of that army,
Obi-Wan agreed.
I think that if the Mandalore was contracted into this against his will by a being he believes to be Higo Damask, that is something worthy of investigation. While I will not argue against the accusation that my personal biases weight my judgment, I do not believe the Mandalore would lie to me, or to the Order, about something of that importance. I know that the cloners on Kamino have been unethical at best in their creation of this army. Clones were being murdered for easily operable deformities, for being female or force-sensitive or not mainline human in appearance. I think this army is made up of more sentient rights violations than can be enumerated, wrapped up in a bow, and delivered to our doorstep at an impossibly convenient time. So yes, I think the Sith has a finger, at least a finger, in this somewhere, although I can't claim to know their motives or methods. We've been chasing the Sith for 10 years. Do you suddenly doubt we know their work?
Anakin backed up its support. Obi-Wan turned slightly and sent his Padawan a calling look through his visor. Obi-Wan appreciated the support, although Anakin might apply a little more tact. Anakin, understanding the scolding even through armor, just gave him a cheeky tilt in return.
The Chancellor, I believe, would be more than happy to dump all of this in our laps,
Anagalia said. Only the fact that he knew her fairly well allowed Obi-Wan to see the irritation that turned down the corners of her mouth and tightened the fine skin around her luminous blue eyes.
Your people are not generals. You were not trained for war,
Jango said firmly.
And yet I see few other options that would shield your sons from those who would grind them down like grist in a mill for a profitable war,
Adi said. For a moment, Jango just cocked his head, and Obi-Wan knew that inside his helmet, Jango was looking at Adi like she was nuts.
If you think I'm not rallying the Mando'a and hunting down the Hutton that imprisoned me for 10 years and held my Adike hostage for my good behavior,
Jango said, shaking his head. You should think again, went unsaid.
Every hot-blooded Mando'a from here to wild space will follow my banner for the chance to blow up some droids and dismantle the corporate sector. Psask! Some of them will sign up just to see if I'm really who I say I am.
And those who ascribe to the principles of plunder? Mace Windu asked from behind his steepled fingers.
Mooney, Tomatam, Skota Isa,
Jango said, and Obi-Wan got at Obi's grin. Mace glanced at Obi-Wan, not sure he really wanted to know.
Long memory, short fuse,
Obi-Wan translated. While originally a rather judgmental appraisal of the Mando'a by outsiders, they'd long ago reclaimed that stereotype and wore it with pride.
Death Watch and those who ascribe to their philosophies aren't welcome, Jango said plainly. I doubt many of their ilk would follow me. I doubt I left many of them alive. But if a Mando'a operating under my orders acted outside the tenets of the Super Commander Codex, they would be met with the justice of the Heart Vod'e.
I really wish your life was less interesting, Obi-Wan. Mace sighed, then turned back to Jango. I imagine you're set on hunting down this potential Sith with or without Republic assistance or authority?
Correct, Jango said. I was hunting him before. I see no reason to stop now that I'm free to take up arms again. It would be easier, for me and the army, if we worked together. I may not have trained all the cadets, but they're my sons. I want to protect them in any way I can. If the only way I could do that is hunting the Sith, that's what I'll do. But I think I can offer a lot more than that. I know how to lead Mando'a into battle, and despite not being raised with a Wezzel there, there are Mando'a.
And if the Senate was willing to hire you, Mace asked, to have you lead this army against the Separatists who may or may not be the Sith you're hunting, what would you demand? Somehow, despite the Mandalore wearing a helmet, Mace was certain Jango was smiling wide and toothy.
Full Republic Commando citizenship for my children, each and every one, whether or not they fight in this war. Fuel for any Mando ships rallying to my banner for the duration of the war. Arms and armor, living wages at Republic rates, and the authority to fight this war as I decide, rather than as the Senate demands.
Jango listed off readily, and Obi-Wan knew that would only be the beginning. Jango was still the leader of his people, despite his years of forced exile, and Obi-Wan knew that, as Jango had promised, Mando'a would come out of the woodwork for the chance to follow their Mandalore into battle. I don't know that I can promise that. Any of that, Mace said wearily.
No, but if the Chancellor doesn't want to run the war himself, he can,
Jango said. For the first time since they'd walked into the council's chambers, Mace's shoulders lowered just a hair. Obi-Wan didn't envy Mace the stress he had to be under. That may be more than the Senate is willing to pay, Mace warned. While we have resisted so far, we cannot outright refuse to lead the army if that is the Chancellor's orders.
I know your history well enough to remember that the Jedi renounced armor and military ranks,
Jango asked.
Does the Chancellor?
At that, Mace smiled, settling back slightly in his seat. The same legislation that had bound the Jedi to obey the Senate and Chancellor had stripped the Jedi of their military might. 1,000 years had passed, but those laws still stood. And if the Chancellor wanted the Jedi to take up military titles once more, what was to say they should not also reform their Navy and Starfighter Corps alongside the army they would be given, and once more hold entire worlds under their control as they once had. You're welcome to stay here while you work out your proposals to the Chancellor, Mace said. I don't feel like listening to Obi-Wan bitch now that he's found you. Hey! Obi-Wan protested, and several of the counselors chuckled softly. Any other business? Depa Bilbo asked, and in a way the other counselors shook their heads. Obi-Wan bowed and led Jango and Anakin out. Anakin waved to Baba, who had been waiting in the antechamber with a datapad to amuse himself.
I'm going to find True,
Anakin said, naming one of his friends.
What, you don't want to spend more time with your old master after being on a ship together for a week?
Obi-Wan teased. Anakin made a vaguely rude hand gesture, then strode toward the lifts.
So we'll have your room to ourselves,
Jango grumbled in Obi-Wan's inhelmet comment. Obi-Wan let out a wet laugh, turning to cling to his spouse for a moment.
He grew up so fast,
Obi-Wan shrugged, then knelt and addressed Bubba.
It's up to you, Bubba. Would you rather stay with your bora and me in my room, or with the younglings in the creche?
Do they have games in the creche? Boba asked very seriously, carefully fitting his mouth around the unfamiliar word.
They do,
Obi-Wan affirmed.
And dessert? If you behave,
Obi-Wan answered, and Boba screwed his face up thoughtfully.
The regular mess where your bora and I will eat has dessert too.
I want to play, Boba declared, and you guys will just make kissy faces. Obi-Wan put back a laugh.
We have a lot of missed kisses to make up for,
Obi-Wan said very seriously, and Baba made one of the most disgusting expressions Obi-Wan had ever had the good fortune to see. Oh! Baba said, I'll stay in the crash. Obi-Wan smiled.
I don't mind if you want to stay with your boy,
Obi-Wan promised. No, I'll stay with the others, Baba declared, drawing himself up and jutting out his chin.
All right, why don't I show you the way then?
Obi-Wan offered, glancing up at Jango to make sure that was okay. Jango nodded, and so did Baba, so Obi-Wan rose, offering Baba one hand and Jango the other. Together, they walked down to the residential areas of the temple, with Obi-Wan occasionally pointing out items of interest, like the entrance to some of the garden rooms. The Alpha Arcs were all still in the halls of healing, and the hot Mando'a had opted to sleep on board the Daybreaker rather than take hastily aired-out bunks in the temple. That night, after a boisterous late meal at which Jango got to meet some of the Jedi his Riduur had grown up amongst, the couple happily returned to Obi-Wan's apartment. In his bedroom, they slowly, gently stripped one another's armor, hands trembling. Jango carefully kissed each of the new scars etched into Obi-Wan's skin as they were bared. Come morning, they woke slowly. They kissed deeply before rising to find Shig and food and ate pressed together in the bed. Eventually, though, they dressed and went to look for their various dependents. Anakin was in the training halls, sparring with his friends, and they found Bubba happily learning hand-to-hand with a clan of younglings in one of the gymnasiums. Anakin waved them away almost without looking over, and Bubba indicated he wished to stay where he was, and so Jango and Obi-Wan took the long way back around to the halls of healing to show Jango some more of the temple. Most of the Alpha Arcs had been discharged and granted quarters in the temple to recuperate, so Jango and Obi-Wan eventually found their way back to the Daybreaker, where they called Arla and then spent the day with their clan, hammering out a proposal to get the clones full sentient rights and the hot Mando'a the authority to pursue the Sith.